Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. You might know about the coal mines around Pennsylvania that once built towns and how many of them are gone. But in places like Philipsburg, the need for work hasn't disappeared. When the mines closed, another industry has seemingly arrived, the one of incarceration. So what happens when a struggling community's economic survival becomes dependent and tied to immigration detention, when jobs, payrolls, and local stability depend on one of the most controversial and harmful systems in America? Today, we're digging into the story of Moshannon Valley Processing Center, now the largest ICE detention center in the Northeast. I can't talk about this place enough because still people don't know that this place even exists, and that in and of itself is concerning. And there are difficult questions facing towns caught between economic survival and, of course, human dignity. For more on this, you can visit PennLive.com. They're doing a multi-series deep dive on this topic. I have no affiliation with them, but they've been a great resource for my work in this area. So shout out to them. My guest today is Jaime Martinez, Executive Director of Pittsburgh-based Frontline Dignity, who works closely with these issues surrounding detention, immigration, and the lived experiences of people inside these facilities. Because behind every single contract, we need to be thinking, behind every single protest and every promise of jobs, there's a bigger question. What happens when detention becomes an economic engine? And can communities built around extraction, first from coal and then from people's lives, imagine a better future? Let's get into it. Thanks for being here, Jaime.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. It's always a pleasure.
So I want to talk about Moshannon. It's, of course, its own space, but it is part of a larger national pattern where economically struggling communities are becoming dependent on these detention centers. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing and seeing from these communities?
Yeah, Natalie. So a bit of context for our viewers here today is that I had the chance to walk 8 days through rural Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh
Mm.
all the way to this detention facility, mirroring the path that many immigrant families take on their way to detention while they're shackled in these vans driven by the workers of the facility. And when you walk, you really have a chance to or you don't really have a chance to sit, but you're walking and you're noticing everything around you in a way that's so different from a car. And what we noticed was folks coming out and handing us water bottles and asking why we were walking. What are these crazy people doing on this country road? And we were given the opportunity to really engage with folks in a very relational way, in a way that is different than the Fox News headline, the Newsmax headline, CNN headline, or the algorithms that we see on social media, but to really bring the lived experience of the immigrant community, what we are seeing each and every day through our work at Frontline Dignity, and bringing that to people whose touch point with immigration isn't really bound to lived experience. And so what we've seen is that in these communities, people either work in these facilities or understand that it exists but not know much about it. And the overwhelming majority of people in these regions don't know that these facilities exist. And so that's why it's important that we get your kinds of reporting and what PennLive's putting out into the world, because the truth about what's going on in detention conditions and how people are suffering cruelty and mistreatment each and every day is something that should be a stain on American values. And we've had the chance as Frontline Dignity to go out to the Clearfield County Commissioners meeting, to be in Clearfield County, to speak with folks on the ground doing the hard work of canvassing their neighbors to shut down this detention facility.
I can't stress enough the importance of the work that you're doing and that Frontline Dignity is doing in this space, in particular around human rights. And I think what upsets me, Jaime, about this whole situation is this conversation around the carceral economy, this idea that detention facilities and prisons are now becoming a place of employment for entire towns. And why that is so insidious to me is that there seems to be a direct correlation between the way in which our economy is functioning, these tariffs, the war. We're stripping away SNAP benefits. We haven't raised the minimum wage in, how many years, from a starvation wage of $7.25. We're cutting off access to education. We don't have healthcare. We're making people more and more desperate to find employment. And in those conditions, it's ripe for exploitation and abuse. And to me, it's not surprising that while that is happening, these are blooming. These ICE detention facilities are blooming. Can you talk a little bit about what you know that is going on within these facilities, in particular inside Moshannon, and why it is so dangerous for people to turn a blind eye or to work for these places?
Yeah. Well, I can't stress enough how ugly these places can become, how they become factories of trauma for immigrants and the families that live outside as well, right? Like, you have the few people that are able to be liberated from these facilities, they come back and they carry PTSD with them, right? There's trauma inflicted, and that has an effect on families. But what we're hearing uniformly is that there is a level of degradation of humanity at every level, at every step, from not having documents available in the language in which you speak, and no attempt to have a sort of conversation with the authorities in a language that you speak, to having to put up little blankets around your bed to be able to sleep because the lights are consistently on, to having to work for like less than poverty wages in order to afford a cup of ramen, working for $1 a day for a $6 cup of ramen, or $11 for another kind of snack. Having to fund $70 a week, like, because all of this is commodified, right? Like, this
Of
is a
course, of
super like
course.
capitalist thing.
Yes.
To eat, you need to have funds in your commissary account. To have a blanket, you need funds in your commissary account. Like, there's all of these different things. Like, nothing is paid for. Like, you have to have somebody pay into your commissary account to get all of these goods that are essential to essentially functioning. In order to text, in order to call family, that's all paid for, and it's outrageous rates. And so what we're seeing is, from the moment folks walk in, they are stripped of their humanity. They're, in the same way that all carceral systems are,
Right.
given uniforms and in specific colors that denote their security level. And they spend months, if not years, there. There are folks that have spent 3 years in this facility, folks that have spent just a few days. It all depends on access to lawyers and access to due process. And unfortunately, depending on how much money you have or the connections that you have, some folks will get out quickly and some folks will never leave. And the whole point of this is to degrade your will to pursue your shot at the American dream. They want to ground you down until you decide to voluntarily deport. And, we see a lot on our social media accounts when we post about these things. People say, well, good. This is a carceral facility. People broke the law, and that's their consequence. They decide to be treated like that. And I think this is kind
Wow.
of pointing to the deeper moral symptom, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is a moral illness that we are facing in this country, where people are willing to degrade others, and they're willing to other individuals
Yeah.
simply because of an action, or because of who they are, or because they have a paper or don't have a paper. We're willing to segment people into groups. And we're willing to degrade people's dignity at the expense of that, in order to feel good, quite frankly, to feel like we're doing better than some other folks. And so we're really trying to address the root of that cause by bringing people into the fold, giving them the truth of what's happening, showing them that it's not something that's far away, but that's in fact very close to them, and walking with folks, as opposed to telling them and speaking to them and, coming at them from above and hitting them over the head with it.
I think it's really important to note that philosophy, of this idea of punitive for punitive's sake, is so antithetical to a functioning society. And honestly, the collective should always be striving for better than an individual. So even if someone has committed a horrific crime and we're angry with them, right? Murder or something, they still should have basic human rights and dignity given to them, even in carceral spaces, because we should want better as a collective than the individual, right? So it's this idea of not what people necessarily, quote unquote, what we think they deserve, but who do we want to be as a society? That to me is the philosophical framing, Jaime, that is constantly missed in this conversation, is that this is all about this sort of tit for tat. And when you're talking about people, many of whom their only quote unquote crime is paperwork, it is that much more outrageous, egregious, atrocious, all the words, to think of how easily and quickly we are willing to hand over this level of authority and abuse of power so that we feel better than the other. And to your point, a lot of this goes back to the isms of, racism, sexism, xenophobia, all of these things that allow sort of that base energy in some people to come to the front. And that is what has me very concerned, because when we're looking at this, what are some of the misconceptions that people have about those who are currently detained? I'm seeing a lot of children in these facilities, and I have a hard time wrapping my head around the idea of this level of punishment being exerted on children and babies. That is beyond to me.
Yeah, well, I checked the numbers today in anticipation of this. As of the beginning of April, 70.6% of people held in facilities like Moshannon, and including Moshannon, have no criminal convictions.
Yeah.
This is a civil detention facility, that's worse than a lot of federal prisons,
Yeah.
right? Like I have a friend who's gone to Moshannon 9 times and has gone to Lewisburg, which is a federal prison facility, medium security, where their person was transferred, their friend was transferred. And
Mm.
they said that Lewisburg and Moshannon, it's like night and day. Lewisburg is so much nicer than Moshannon, even down to the way the guards treat you.
Wow.
And so we consider, like, first off, no one should be dehumanized. No one should be
Period.
disrespected, right? Um, I was raised Catholic, and I know that when we see somebody that is considered less than, we see the face of God,
Mm.
right? And we need to treat them as such with the utmost respect and with the utmost love, regardless of how they are perceived by others and by ourselves. Beyond that, we know that people are saying, well, they need to come in the right way. There's a lot of misconceptions about what constitutes a crime, and we
Right.
get caught up over the idea of the word criminal, right?
Mm.
And again, it's important to remember that these facilities are not like criminal facilities. These are
Right.
civil detention centers,
Thank you.
right? And civil detention centers should have no comparison to a federal prison facility where there are actual crimes being committed. But even beyond that, like, we're falling into the trap of thinking that one should be nicer than the other. And we're still
Mm-hmm.
talking about one being more deserving than another, right? Like, we need to break out of that. And so I encourage all of us listening today, like, how are we breaking out of the idea that we need to punish people for punishment's sake, right? And what does it mean to rehabilitate the individual? How do we see the best in folks and understand that they are more than the sum of their actions, and really start to treat folks as human beings?
I think it's important to point out the hypocrisy of the statement of, well, these people are criminals. I don't want to hear that, especially from anyone that is supporting the president right now. Just as a reminder that President Donald Trump is a convicted criminal. In May of 2024, a New York state jury found him guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. We're not going to get into all that. But if we're going to talk about criminality and we're going to talk about who is worthy and who isn't of dignity and respect, there you go, everybody. Your president is a criminal, and you don't seem to be wanting to put him in one of these facilities or anything related. When we're moving on to this idea of what's going on in the communities themselves, I want to be able to touch on this a little bit and pivot to local economies and this carceral economy. Some residents are arguing in spaces like I think I said Philipsburg.
Yeah.
I want to double check. Yes, thank you. Philipsburg, that these are jobs at these detention facilities and that these depressed economic areas need jobs. So how do you, Jaime, in your position with what you do with Frontline Dignity, respond to community members who feel that detention centers are necessary for their survival from a economic perspective?
Well, first I'd like to kind of paint the picture for folks. Here in Western Pennsylvania, this is the Rust Belt, right? Places of industry where companies came in, drained areas of resource. And then
Mm-hmm.
as soon as they made their money, they packed up and left everybody in poverty, right?
Yep.
And as I walked through central Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania, through these rural towns, towns like Coalport, towns like Houtzdale, you start to realize, yeah, there's economic depression here because everybody left because they couldn't find a job. But there are all these plaques that say 150 years ago, the president of the United States stopped here and talked about how wonderful and booming the local economy was. And you can start to realize the resentment and the bitterness. And what we're seeing right
Sure.
now is just a recycling of that, right? The new robber barons are these detention facilities. And it's so important to remember that once again, these are companies that are private
Yeah.
for-profit prison companies, publicly traded, and their bottom
Mhm.
line, their pockets are lined with wealth depending on how many beds they're able to fill, right? And so
Yes.
it comes back to that question of what are our values?
Mm.
What are we willing to fund and not fund? What do we want to see our county resources going to? Let's start there. And, there's a lot of things that this facility could be. This could
Yeah.
be a healthcare facility.
Mhm.
In Philipsburg and in Clearfield, it takes more than a half hour to
Mm.
get to an actual like emergency room, to get to an
Yeah.
actual like real hospital. Like rural hospitals are collapsing
Mhm.
because private equity is, taking them up and shutting them down, and people are losing access to healthcare. Imagine what kinds of resources we could dump into uh, these counties in order to revitalize them and transform what are these big warehouses into places of life, places of
Mhm.
growth,
Yeah.
right? That's possible. But we also need our political leaders and the people that are in charge of managing that budget and making those investments and advocating for the people in these regions to have the backbone and political courage and the political imagination to say, yes, we can do this. We can transform this. We can choose something different. Because it's easy to say, well, this is how we've always done it. This is what it's been. It's better to just not touch things.
Mm.
But history is going to remember us. History is going to judge us. And I see in the comments who owns the stocks, right?
Yep.
I believe the
Lydia.
acting.
Shout out to Lydia.
That's right. Shout out to Lydia. There is a new ICE director, and this guy is like his immediate employment, his immediate former employment was at the Geo Group, which
Yeah.
is the company that runs Moshannon Valley Detention Center. And so you have at the very top of this system the guy who got a waiver signed by the government
Mhm.
to be able to work in the government and have a perceived conflict of interest, and is now very much likely going to line the pockets of the Geo Group and keep more people in these detention facilities. Like the corruption is so visible.
Yeah.
They're not afraid of it anymore. Like, uh, unfortunately, there's just such a rotten media landscape where
Mm.
there's a lack of truth tellers, right? And there's so many distorted incentives that a lot of these things go unperceived, right? Like you have national conglomerates scooping up local publications and destroying their ability to actually report on what's real news,
Yeah.
and then because of that, now you have people in Philipsburg and people in small little towns where these facilities are that have no idea about what's happening because of these distorted interests. So I think we need to like turn our attention towards what can be, figure out like what is our vision? Like what do we want our county to look like? What do we want our region to look like? Do we have to sacrifice the humanity of other people for us to put food on the table? I
Mm.
don't think so. I don't think that's the truth. And there's a lot of people that whenever we talk over these situations with them, they agree and they're very on board. They just don't know about these things. So it's a matter of just getting the word out, having these conversations at our kitchen tables, around the fire pit as the weather gets warmer, over Memorial Day weekend, right? With family over as we're
Mhm.
at the barbecue, telling people that these things exist and that we can't get caught up in the minutia of terminology, but we need to dig down into the root causes and make strong decisions and actually show up. Show up
Yeah.
and advocate in front of the people who make these decisions and tell them what we want to see as people in our communities.
And I so appreciate that. As we wrap this up, I always appreciate your perspective, one, but thank you for also bringing into focus once again the amount of money that is being poured into these spaces, who owns these spaces, and this really ties back to a lot of other issues that you and I have discussed that I've had other people on as we're looking at AI and surveillance and policing and data centers and how those areas in particular of the billionaire class are of interest. And it's not lost on, I think, you or myself or our audience that they're also buying up the corporate media, to your point exactly, so that these stories and narratives are lost in the larger ecosystem of media, which is exactly why, if you have found this useful or of interest, please share, please subscribe, help us to amplify this. And once again, a shout out to PennLive for providing sort of the foundational work for today's interview. So, Jaime, as we wrap up, my last question for you is, if people watching and listening remember one thing about ICE and these detention centers and the communities around them, what should it be?
This isn't a fight between the residents of the county versus the facility and the
Right.
people working in the facility, right? People find the need to put food on the tables. They are having to make tough choices in their lives. This is a fight between a choice of whether to sacrifice our humanity for the cost of lining the wealthy's pockets, or having the political imagination to imagine more for our regions, right? This is a fight between the corruption of an administration that is openly admitting to, colluding with these private for-profit prison companies to house our neighbors, and ordinary people who are just trying to make their neighborhoods better, right? People who are wanting to pursue the American dream in the way they know how to.
Mm.
So I encourage folks to just look up in their specific region, in their state, what detention facilities exist. Go to those county commissioner meetings and ask, why are you supporting this?
That's right.
Show me the numbers. Ask for the truth. Be the truth teller in the room. And don't be afraid to ask questions. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of influence, a lot of powerful people that are keeping these systems in place. But our humanity and our ability to collectively organize will always beat that out, because our humanity is our best thing about us. So keep up the good work, keep up the fight, and dig into the truth.
Amen to that. Lydia, thank you for sharing your thoughts about getting people to come on board on Substack and check out more of these kinds of conversations. Jaime, it's interesting to me because when you said that about going to people's, local spaces where politicians and local community leaders are at and sharing these stories, I think it's so important that we do that, because in this moment where I think our generation and the generations coming up really focus on this sort of sense of instant gratification, I don't know how long this arc will take to resolve itself. I don't know how long this path will be, but I think it's really important people like you and the people watching and listening are planting seeds. And maybe you'll never get to sit under that tree, but you'll be a part of growing that little seed into a sapling, into a young tree, and then maybe someday the tree that people can find respite under. And I truly believe that we cannot make change unless we dream it and unless we speak it to one another. So I'm always appreciative of being in conversation with you. So if people want to support Frontline Dignity, where can they go? Oh, see, Billy, I'm just about to have him answer that. Perfect.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you can follow us at Frontline Dignity on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at frontlinedignity.org. And if you're in the southwestern Pennsylvania area, you can attend one of our trainings. And if you're not and you want a training in your area, you can go to our website, fill out a form, and we'll fly out to you. We will work with your community. We will set up rapid response networks, and we will stand in the defense of dignity with you and your neighbors.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jaime. Thanks to everybody that joined and gave so much positive energy while we were doing this, having this conversation and leaving all of those thoughtful comments. I appreciate all of you. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.